we all win when our organizations are more diverse. And we also need to be really, really specific as opposed to saying we just want to be more diverse and inclusive for everyone, because we're all diverse. All of us are diverse. And when we don't name specific types of diversity that we're after, that's also where progress really gets lost, is we think, well, we're just doing this for everybody. And when you have a strategy for everyone, it's not actually a strategy. I'm Omari Jahi Aarons, Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of the National African American Insurance Association. And this is the future of insurance.
Right, Omari, I'm very excited to sit down with you. I don't know if you fully appreciate the opportunity you gave me when I was starting out in my whole thought leadership and kind of advisory world. You took a flyer on this like random boring guy writing about insurance, and that was a huge leg up. So it's very cool a few years later to sit down with you and hear about your journey.
Yeah, look, I didn't feel like it was too much of a risk. I had already heard you speaking at the insurance library.
Thank you.
I think was kind of the first interaction I had with you. And based on that conversation, I was like, oh, we've got to bring this guy over. So yeah, I think the work that you've been doing, I've been a fan of. And so it's been great following you and seeing your journey as well.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, that does kind of set the stage for the conversation I want to have with you, which is kind of about how we support people in this industry and career progression and the future of talent, which we were saying before recording, like this is a conversation we've been having for 10, 20, whatever years. Yeah. And we keep having the same conversation every year at all the conferences. We talk about all the great stuff, but we still have to have the same conversation, which means the great stuff either isn't so great or we're not doing it the way we talk about. And so I'm excited to dig into this, but I want to kind of preemptively challenge everyone listening is don't just nod your head and be like, yeah, that's, I feel the energy for where we could go. You actually have to do something with it, right? Yeah. So like start taking this stuff as calls to action and engagement and not just, oh yeah, that's important. And what's going to happen one day when? It's like, it is one day when. So little warning to everyone listening, like you do have to start pitching in if you want to see things move.
Absolutely.
Can we just tell people who you are before we start diving in too far?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking the other day, I was like, how long have I been in the insurance side of things? Before I came into insurance, I spent 10 years at Macy's as an operations manager, and then a stores trainer, and then I was in the learning and development space and human resources. So I kind of grew up in the HR people management side of things, and I came into the insurance industry in 2016. And had no idea that I would be in insurance. It was not at all something that I had picked or chosen for myself.
Yeah,
I came in at the invitation of my college roommate, who was working for Liberty Mutual at the time, and ran into each other at an alum event, just catching up on life, sharing that I was looking for other opportunities. And he was selling me on a great company, great benefits, better pay than what I was making, right? An opportunity to really explore more career verticals than just the human resources side.
Yeah.
And so, that was what brought me into the industry. And so did some work for about 5 years over at Liberty Mutual, took 2 years off of being a full-time employee for someone else, and was running my own management consulting firm, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work as an independent consultant, mostly for insurance companies and financial services. And then almost a year ago now, it was June last year, is when I started with NAAIA. So it's been a good journey now getting to this point and being here.
I hate to say this, but I think it's necessary. Tell people who NAAIA is, because I mentioned to someone this week that I was doing this interview with you, and they were like, "Oh, what is NAAIA? Is that a broker?" It's not a broker. Tell people who NAAIA is.
Yeah, it's we are like the worst, best kept secret in the industry, and we're doing a lot of work to change that. So I'll talk about that.
And I wouldn't fault NAAIA as much as this is on us in the industry, but so this is people's chance to get the education.
Yeah, I say to people 26 years ago, everybody now is talking about DEI and DEIB and justice and liberation, and like we're throwing all these other words. When NAAIA started 26 years ago, I think we were just at diversity initiatives. We weren't even D and I yet, right?
Right.
So we've been around as the alphabet has continued to grow, but we're we're a 501c6 organization that was chartered in Cincinnati, Ohio in March of 97, and founded by a Black independent agent who was walking in rooms, going to conferences, looking around and saying, there's got to be more than just me in this industry.
Yeah.
And so started with very informal networking and then formalized networking and then built a statewide association in Ohio. And then in 97 went national. And I would say when NAAIA started, in 97, because we were just doing diversity initiatives, there wasn't a big focus from corporate sponsors in the industry to come and support an organization like NAAIA, right? And so NAAIA was very small in the beginning and then really started expanding out into having chapters in major cities. All the way up through probably, I would say 2018, we had just under 500 members. And then in 2018, really started a rapid expansion and growth for us. And so we crossed 1,000 members, I want to say at the end of 2019. And today we have 1,800 members, 23 chapters, and about 5 other locations that are looking to charter a chapter there as well. So we're well on our way. I think probably by the end of this year or early next, we'll be at close to 2,500 members and continuing to grow from there.
What is the mission? I mean, obviously, like you mentioned the networking side, but like, what is the intention?
Yeah, the way we frame our mission is that NAAIA is on a mission to diversify the insurance industry, right? And very much to your opening comments, it's the conversation that Mr. Tillman was having when he founded NAAIA in 97 and his earlier experiences before that, looking around in certain rooms in the industry and going, where are the people of color, right?
Yeah.
And not seeing people. Unfortunately, as much as there's been a significant amount of movement and progress in some spaces, there are way too many people who are asking that same question today.
Yeah.
So the way that we fulfill our mission is through 3 things. One is professional development. The second is personal empowerment, which for us is the access to mentorship, networking, going events, growing your network, and then access to talent opportunities. So both from partners in the industry who are looking to hire racially diverse talent to help meet their goals and to make their workplaces more inclusive. And then for our members who are looking for their next opportunity, whether that's at their current company or somewhere else in the industry, particularly after they have grown and honed their skills and they know that they are ready for their next opportunity, have been knocking on the door trying to find it. NAAIA is a place that helps them find that next opportunity to apply their skill set at a higher level.
Yeah. I mean, when you say, you're aiming towards 2,500 members with the end of 2023.
Yeah.
We have like 2 million people in the insurance industry. And I know that's not the only like Black professionals in insurance, but I mean, just to give people a sense of the scale of how much more work is needed for this industry. That like fantastic where you've gotten to, and we got a long way to go. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation is like, well, what are the things going on that you think are starting to create some impact or ways that people could have impact? Because it's 2,500, I mean, even 25,000 isn't the right number by any stretch. Like there's no right number, but it's certainly still way underrepresented for even if we just got to kind of recognizing what's out in the population as a whole, but within our community of insurance, we are way skewed. We're not anywhere near kind of just being level set with, the osmosis of the world that we live in.
Yeah, well, as much as DEI is a topic of conversation in which like we're pushing for the good, excuse me, it also very much is in the news in a sense of there's a backlash around diversity, equity, inclusion. We're seeing them in the schools and in certain states in the US as well, right? So it's not, what's always kind of interesting to me when people raise objections to DEI is like the whole point of the work around diversity, equity, inclusion is not to be polarizing.
Yeah.
It's not to put people out, but it's to create spaces for all of us to be in, right? And so partly when you talk about like, why is there underrepresentation from a racial and ethnic standpoint in insurance? Like we have to look at part of the history of our country
Yeah.
and the damage to trust by financial institutions um, in communities of color in the US, right? And so you look at practices like redlining and you look at the mortgage crisis, right? And while those are things that have affected many people, not just Black people, they've had a disproportionate impact on the Black community.
Yeah.
So this whole notion that money is safer in the mattress in somebody's house rather than in a bank is a very real one. And we're not talking about great, great, great grandparents generation where these things have happened to, right? Like we're talking about grandparents, we're talking about
It's about right
parents,
now.
we're talking about
No.
right now,
Yeah.
right? And so, um, I think part of the work is helping to restore trust in insurance products and services and
Yeah.
financial products and services. How do we do education? How do we introduce insurance as a career of choice for the Black community earlier on and help to demystify all these different aspects of insurance beyond needing renters insurance or homeowners insurance or auto insurance,
Yeah.
right? Or life insurance in particular. There's so much more to us and to our industry. And those are not conversations that are happening at the dinner table, I would
Yeah.
say in the American household in general, but certainly not fully in the Black community in the way that it needs to.
Yeah. I think, I mean, you hit on things that are sparking a couple of things. I think we've a lot of talent discussions in the industry have focused on lately is, we all talk like, oh, it's a boring industry. And so like we can't get younger people to want to work in that. We need to do something about that. We have to stop talking about it that way, but we also have to kind of spark people's interest. So the one side is attracting that new talent, whether it's high schoolers, colleges and 2-year programs and community colleges, or historically Black universities and colleges, the risk management, programs and risk and insurance programs and the different universities that are out there. So there's that whole like future talent pipeline side.
Yeah.
But then there's like, even if you open up that spigot, then we've got like the drain is blocked, not the drain because it's going up, but like people get to a certain point and
Yeah.
then they're frozen. And I know I worked at a fantastic carrier that was, I think, a lot more progressive than many of the carriers that I see out there or have seen. But we still had like people like, oh, you look around, like we're really diverse. And we're like, you look in the IT department and there's lots of like Indian people there. I'm like, wait, hang on a second. Like, recognize what you're saying. And most of them are contractors, they're not employees. So,
Mhm.
you're giving yourself credit, which I don't like that in the first place, without recognizing the dynamics actually still just as broken.
Right.
And then you're seeing people of color, but they're in the underwriting support function primarily, which is, 60-70% people of color, but it's also the lowest paying jobs that we have. And it's been proved like it's very hard to get into an underwriting role from those support roles because we end up hiring people with a few years of experience that come from our competitors or our brokers or whatever, our trading partners that
Right.
look and feel like everyone's always looked and felt. So even if we have that talent coming in, we still kind of end up at this point of freezing people. But then you get people who are like, oh, we're good. Look at our numbers. It's like, but you're masking all these dynamics that are still broken, even if you fix that inbound part of it. It's a much more, it's a multi-stage process.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something to, and I think as organizations report their diversity numbers, right? It's like we have to be able to be very real about what it is that we're saying.
Yeah.
So talking about customer facing roles in the sense of a call center or support roles that are under $100,000 a year, right? Like in terms of annual compensation, we see great diversity, right, across the
Yeah.
industry. So, as a Black professional looking around, looking at representation in the field, I don't have any questions about whether or not I can be a claims adjuster or if I can be an underwriting assistant or if I can be in a distribution call center, right? Like there's a plethora of people who look like me and
Yeah.
come from places similar to what I have come from and share my cultural background there. But when I look up into the C-suite inside of an organization, right? Like I remember um, interviewing for a role and I had gone to visit the office. And so I was going to be working on I think at that time, the 17th floor, right? And so I asked the question of the recruiter around the diversity statistics, and I got this fantastic number, right? Like
Yeah.
out of X number of employees, and I think it was like 30%, 35%. And I said, so of the people who work on the 17th floor, right, like which was an indication of the title and role and responsibility
Yeah.
of leadership in the company, right? Like at the right below the executive, like senior manager and executive levels, what does the racial and ethnic diversity look like there? What does the gender diversity look like there?
Yeah.
And it was like those were very different numbers, right? Because
Totally.
for me, I'm like, I started my career in a call center with Macy's, so it's very much surrounded by a lot of people who looked like me. But then when I went into stores leadership meetings and to do training there, and when I was in the corporate office downtown, presenting to the group vice presidents and senior vice presidents, often I was the only one in the room.
Yeah.
And that was true of most of my work experience when I'm on the 17th floor or the 41st floor of a building where all the senior leadership sits. I'm generally the youngest person in the room. I'm likely the only person of color in the room, and if not, like maybe one of two, maybe
Yeah.
three if we're having a good day. And so like we've really got to be very real around what does the leadership look like inside of our organization at each level.
Yeah.
And one thing I used to ask senior leaders as a consultant, and I encourage everybody to borrow this question as well, is I say outside of the, when you walk into work, outside of the security guards, right, that are staffing the building, outside of the maintenance workers, right, outside of administrative professionals, how many people of color are you interacting with as you look at your calendar for the week, right? Like in each of the meetings that are filling our calendars on a half-hour basis or an hour basis, how many people of color are in those meetings? And what roles are the people of color playing in those meetings? Are they there to present? Are they decision makers?
Yeah.
Are they co-owners, right? And that's what really paints a picture of how diverse are you as an organization.
Yeah. We got a ways to go. I do think this notion of seeing someone who looks like me, if you've not been in that position, you really don't understand the impact that that has consciously or subconsciously. People really don't get that. I was lucky enough to be in an incredibly uncomfortable situation, like racially myself. I spent some time in China, like a long time ago, before it was anywhere near like what people saw during the Olympics or now. And I mean, I could be the only white person I would see for days. And I didn't think much of it at first until like it started to hit me. And when I would see someone who looked like me, and we'd like wave at each other like we knew each other, and I mean, they could be Swedish, like I don't know where they were from, but that's when it hit me, is like I'm such an extreme minority. I see no one like me, and that has no impact on like my future path. Fast forwarding to being a leader in the industry, and I remember bringing the first person of color into the Chicago office of this particular carrier, and it struck me as like we kept having African American attorneys, was what we were hiring for as an attorney. We'd have African American candidates come in
Mm,
and pull themselves out of the process after they came in for, and I was like, it was killing me. So it was like they're great candidates, but they walk in and it's like, there's am I ready to be the first? And thank God we did have someone. And then it was like, oh, that changed things. And you started to see progress. But that someone who's willing to be the first, that is brave and bold. And it's hard. And I
yeah,
think people around them don't necessarily understand like the weight that you carry and the toll that that can take, of just not seeing that kind of like, where am I in this?
yeah, yeah.
It's just a
There-
basic human thing, right?
One of the things we talk about in terms of workplace engagement metrics, right, is like, do I have a best friend at work?
Yeah.
And so, if I'm having a bad day, and I always say to people, like, you're not really doing your job well if like at least once a month you're like, I could just quit, right? Like I could just like something happens where you have a frustrating moment
Yeah.
where you text your bank account and you pull up the app and you look at it and you're like, oh, I have a mortgage. I have some other like, so I can't just walk out today, right? I can't just throw up the papers and be like, I'm out. Right. So we all have these situations at work where we get really frustrated. And so do I have somebody who I can go and talk to around like, yeah, I just came out of this meeting. right? Like
Mhm.
things didn't necessarily go my way, get some coaching and some advice. When you're a person of color, the other dimension that is always present is uh, is there some underlying bias that was happening as part of how this particular thing went down, right?
Yeah.
And so having another person of color to run those things by and go, am I crazy? Am I imagining this? Am I reading into a situation that maybe is not there, right? I remember I consider myself a fairly likable guy. People generally like working with me.
Yeah.
I'm very collaborative by nature, and which sometimes to a fault. And I remember having a business partner, and it was just like, it was the first time in my career, I think I was 27 or 28. It was the first time in my career that it was like someone just did not want to work with me
Yeah.
whatsoever. And it was one of those things I was like, okay, maybe I said something wrong. Maybe there's another dynamic present, right? And what was important for me is I was running through all the checks, right? And it was like, all right, is this a gender thing? Is it a race thing? Is it an age thing?
Yeah.
Right? Is it a title thing? Because I had a higher title. Like, what is it, right? That's
Yeah.
contributing to this. And I needed peers that understood my experience and my point of view that I could go and talk to say, like, let me lay this out for you. This is what I'm doing. This is
Yeah.
how this is going. And to get that coaching and advice, it's absolutely critical.
And they get the context of the organization. Like, it's great to have external mentors and people to lean on, but when it's someone who, like, you don't have to explain who the players are and the
Right.
culture and whatever's, it just, you can get right into the meat of it. Like,
Yeah.
great for the external perspective, but also to have that, it's just like, okay, we get each other on
Yeah,
that
yeah,
basic
yeah.
level.
Somebody who can say, well, this division and that division have had a tense relationship for years because of this decision that was made,
Right.
5 years ago. So that's not actually you. That's kind of they grew up with they don't like us kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Those types of organizational dynamics and history that people are able to bring forward for you are really important, right?
Yeah.
And often when you don't have someone who is willing to give you the unwritten rules of the organization, you start to violate the unwritten rules, right? Just by showing up and being a professional because you
Right.
don't know. And that kind of conversation generally are the things that happen over lunch or happen at happy hour,
Right.
right? Or my kids and your kids play together or in a sports team together, and we're at the game on the sidelines, right? That's where we're having those kind of conversations. It's not often in the one-on-one with your manager. It's not often in the team meeting. It's not in the department meeting where those things come out, right? It's
Yeah.
more the informal relational settings. And so, it's not just the what's happening in your team meetings, but it's also who gets invited to the outings, who comes to happy hour, who's there to celebrate so-and-so's birthday or promotion or what have you. Those spaces are also equally as important.
Yeah. Well, Amari, I know we're starting to get tight on time, but we can't solve every problem in just a few minutes. But what are I talked about, like, trying to give people a sense of taking action. What are ways that, regardless of whether you're a person of color or not, how do we actually not just make this the DE and I conversation that goes on at whatever conference we're at every year, and it just gets repeated with,
Yeah.
maybe different people, maybe not, because there aren't that many people to pick from. How do we actually make some progress?
Yeah, it's a good question. So NAAIA and Marsh McLennan just released the second version of we did a study in 2018, The Journey of African American Insurance Professionals, authored by Dr. Leroy Nunnery. And Dr. Nunnery came back and did a reassessment on, did people apply recommendations from the first study?
Hmm.
And then certainly following George Floyd's murder, right, we saw a number of organizations issue statements and make public plans. So did that also contribute to progress forward? So did a new assessment in 2022, released the study January 2023. And essentially what the study found is there's a lot more activity around diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Like there's a lot more movement. We're doing training around unconscious bias. We're standing up employee resource groups and business resource groups. We've launched mentoring programs inside of organizations. But all of those things, that movement has actually not meant forward progress, right? When
Hmm.
we look at the number of people coming into the industry who are people of color, and as we look at promotion and growth opportunities for people of color, And as we look at compensation band for people of color, stuck at between 100 and 150,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when we track what those equivalent roles are, these are generally non-manager positions, non-leadership positions inside of organizations, even if there's someone there who manages a team. And so what we know is it is the combination of having a strong manager, right? Like who is checking in with you on your progress, right? Helping you to develop and sharpen skills, identifying opportunities for you. It's having mentors in an organization. It's having sponsors in an organization. It's having access to coaching for the role that you're in now and for your next role, right? So access to executive coaching in particular. And it's also exposure from growth assignments, stretch assignments, right, inside of organizations. And one of the things the study found is that a significant number of people in the response to the new plans that have been announced in a refresh strategy have taken on growth and stretch assignments that are related to DE&I.
Okay.
And our organizations and our industry is not valuing those stretch assignments as people are being considered for promotion,
Yeah.
right? So there's a whole question of, we say we're committed and we
Yeah.
want to do this work. We enlist people of color inside of organizations to help lead this work, and then don't value the additional work that those folks are doing over and above their job, right? Keeping in mind, most ERG leaders are not paid. People are weighing in on the training or participating in training. They're not necessarily experts in adult learning theory or in learning and development, right? But sharing perspective to make sure training is culturally responsible and relevant, right? And as much as we've been talking about mentors for years, right? Like when we were doing the study and we asked people about their mentoring relationships, the number of people who responded not applicable because they don't have a mentor.
Mm.
So I was thinking going into the study that African Americans inside of organizations are over mentored and under sponsored, but it's actually under mentored, under sponsored, under coached, right? And not seen for stretch assignments. So there's not necessarily a magic combination. Like we know all the things, but how do we value all the assignments that people of color are taking and applying transferable skills from leading an employee resource group or helping to weigh in on training and see that as strategic moves and advancement for the organization and get valued for that, that moves someone into a vice president or senior vice president role.
Yeah. I'm worried about when I hear people are doing these things and not being rewarded or recognized for it. Quite often they end up being penalized for it,
Yes.
because no matter how many extra hours you put into things, something's got to give. And like, I've hired a lot of people out of law practice into internal claims roles, former attorneys, and a lot of them are women, and a lot of them were being thrown the recruiting task at their firms because they're women, and then penalized for not having the hours. And it's like, we're not giving you anything for the recruiting. We expect it of you because the men are busy. But you're not meeting your hours, or you might meet them, but everyone else is way over them. And it's like, well, what do you expect me to do? Because you have me at this law school for 3/4 of the week, this week. Like how am I supposed to get the hours in? Where we do that, it's like, oh, no, we appreciate that. But consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously, you are going to be penalized for putting that effort in. And so it's like, it's not just you didn't get recognized, you're also getting beaten for it. And that's a hell of a place to put someone.
So that's a great example of like the real cost of being one of the only or of a few in an organization. I said to my mom at one point in time, I was like, I clearly should have been like a model for Calvin Klein or Ralph Lauren or something, right? So I'm like, I'm either just on this level of being incredibly handsome, or I am always like the only young Black male or the newest young Black male in the organization, where I get put on all the recruiting assignments. I'm on the posters, I'm in all the videos. And
You
of course,
dress really well, I will say. So it could
my mom said, well, why can't both things be true, right? Like,
fair enough.
But it's like, all right, like we got to think about this, right? Like I'm in an overabundance of campaigns. And so you're stepping away from being in meetings and your job to go do a video shoot or to be at the career fairs, right? And we all know, and I think for underrepresented groups and organizations and underpowered groups, because women are not underrepresented in organization, they generally outnumber men,
Yeah.
but they're not at the same rate in leadership positions, right? So women know intrinsically that it's really important for them to show up at the career fair. Otherwise, other women are not going to come into the organization to help create the change. And same
Yeah.
for people of color, right? Like, it's important for me to be at the table so that people see me and know that I'm there, not just the face on the poster behind me, right? Like,
Yeah.
that, or the video that's on the website. But at one point, I remember I had someone message me on LinkedIn and they were like, I just wanted to see if you were a real person or not. Because when I was Googling your company, right, I see you in the video,
Yeah.
saw you on the brochure that they sent me in the mail, right? You were on the flyer, the collateral on the table. And I wasn't sure if you were like a stock image model that
Yeah.
they had, just put out. And
Yeah.
they were like, before I get on a plane to fly all the way across the country to do this job interview, like, I want to know if this organization is like really serious about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was funny when I got the message, it was like 11 o'clock at night here. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna call this guy, right? And so I did, and we had probably like an hour conversation.
Wow.
And he was just like, so you are a real person. Like they didn't just create a fake LinkedIn profile for you,
Well,
right?
and hey, right now with generative AI, like you could just make a person. I mean, but but then it's also like I always and only see you. So are you always and only the
Are you
one?
the only
Like,
one?
yeah, is it an army of one here? And that's like that's not a great story either.
No, no. But what I will say is there are people who will say yes to the opportunity of being the first or
Hmm.
one of a few if organizations are serious about their commitment to building inclusive work environment that will make it better for others to come, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are people who are attracted to that opportunity. And so this is part of the truth in recruiting and the truth in our employment brand as an industry is to say, listen, we're not there in terms of racial diversity overall in the industry, and certainly not in leadership roles. We're not there in terms of gender diversity, particularly in leadership roles, right?
Yeah.
And we want to be better. And we need people to help us weigh in on the strategy. We need you to come because you're brilliant and you do X thing well, and we need that too in our organization. But we also are looking for people who are going to help us build the culture that we want to have. And there are people who will absolutely say yes to that. Where I think people get tripped up is when they come in after being sold, right? You see the brochure that has an Asian, a Black person, a Latina, right? Like, and everybody's like hugging and smiling in one big happy family. And then they come in the office and they're looking around and they're like,
Where are those
who are
people?
those people, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not who I'm seeing in the cafeteria meeting for lunch.
Yeah.
So if we're honest about who we are and we are honest about the intentions of who we want to be, then I think that's where we'll have more, we'll do better overall in recruiting and bringing people into our organizations. We'll do better in terms of the advancement, because we're not doing well. What all the research tells us is we're not doing well with the people who are already in the industry. Why would someone else want to come into the industry?
Yeah. Yeah. We got to fix our house before we start trying to sell it.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Omari, I'm hearing the sound clip in that piece you just said, and I'm like, that's a strong place to end. But I do this isn't like a 30-minute conversation, and nor is it a one-time conversation. So I appreciate you not being the first, but being committed to the work that you're doing and putting in moments like this. Just we do have to get people thinking more.
Yeah.
And acting. And so like you have said a number of things that people need to actually think about and just look around and be like, well, where are we at with that? And where could I do something to put us in a different place than where we are today? Because there's all these like micro conscious choices you get to make, especially in leadership. Are you making them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just haven't.
Not even can I do something, right? Like, what can I do?
Yeah.
Because we all at every level in the industry, but certainly in leadership roles, we all have the ability to do something to help make our environments more inclusive and equitable. And so, I say to people, think about it 1 hour a day, do something 1 hour a week, right? Like, And if you are moving in that way, it's the micro moments that are going to build to the big progress moments as
Yeah.
well. Right?
Yeah.
It's a movement, not just a moment in time. And
Right.
so, 1 hour a day, 1 hour a week to do something and take an action, to make a phone call, to have a mentoring conversation, to reach out to a college or university, not just an HBCU, right? Like
Yes.
there's plenty of opportunity to do something. And if you're lost, certainly call me. I'm happy to give some pointers and advice. But I also tell people, use Google. Like, we use it for everything else. Like, Google, what should
Yeah.
I do around diversity, equity, and inclusion in my organization? You'll find tons and tons of articles that will give advice on places to start.
Yeah. And be supportive of NAAIA and organizations like NAAIA that are trying to, like you said, like, it's not can you can, like, that's
Yeah,
been answered. The question is, will you? And so these are all the ways that you can, with that hour of action. And frankly, like, let's call that the bare minimum, but you can start there.
yeah,
Support, and be involved. And it is a conscious lifting up. You can't just like, oh, in 5 years from now it'll be better. Like, that doesn't just happen. You have to do
right,
something to bring it about.
right, yeah. In every organization, there's a groundswell that's happening,
Yeah.
whether it has made itself known or not, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's this work is not just about Black people. It's not just about women. It's not just about people of color, right? Like, what we find in all of the employee engagement and customer experience data is that we all win when our organizations are more diverse, across all diversity types: LGBTQIA plus, age, generational in the workplace, right? Like, we need all the things. And we also need to be really, really specific, as opposed to saying we just want to be more diverse and inclusive for everyone,
Yeah.
because we're all diverse, right? Like, all of us are diverse. And when we don't name specific types of diversity that we're after and say we want to be more diverse and inclusive of everyone, but we recognize that we need to start with the promotion of women, and we need to start with the promotion and hiring of African Americans in our organization, right? That's also where progress really gets lost, is we think, well, we're just doing this for everybody. And when you have a strategy for everyone, it's not actually a strategy.
Yeah. Well said. Omari, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you on.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you to Omari for taking some time out of his day to share a little bit about what NAAIA is doing and thoughts on kind of moving the whole industry and how we all have a responsibility to engage in changing the dynamic here. I've been to, like I said, like, so many different events, conferences, roundtables, etc., where we've been talking about the talent issues, DE&I issues, etc. And we're not really doing anything to move forward. But there are people who are trying. There are people who are putting things in place. And Omari's a great example of that. And so is the whole community at NAAIA. And one of the things I would say to all of you is, if you're a leader, if you have staff, what choices are you making with the resources that you have? And what support and guidance are you giving the people on your team of where they can turn? I was personally surprised by the number of members that NAAIA has, that it wasn't many multiples higher. And that's not, it's not a knock on NAAIA. It's really a knock on, well, I'll call it out myself, for when I was leading a team of claims professionals and I didn't know about NAAIA. And I wish that I had. And I feel like that was my responsibility, to be aware of it so that I could guide and educate my team for, African American members to have a place to turn. But there's similar groups for lots of other communities that can also use support and need more representation. And I think for everyone who's a leader in this industry, present or future, you have a responsibility to think about the guidance that you're giving your people so they know where to turn for the support and community that they need. So you can feel that sense of, people like me are doing this and there's someone I can turn to. And it's helpful to have people from different perspectives and cultures and backgrounds and ethnicities to turn to, but it's also helpful to have people who you can immediately identify with for other reasons, so that you feel that connection and that support. That's what helps us thrive. And it has benefits for recruitment, has benefits for development, has benefits for everything. So thank you again to Omari. I hope that this is a moment that we're all taking back and thinking about our hand in the equation and what we can do to change things. Join me next time, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks, everyone.